On this episode of What's Going On with Shipping, some bad things have been happening to Russian shipping. I'm your host, Sal McCoglano, and welcome to today's episode. So Russia has been experiencing a kind of a spate of bad luck here regarding vessels. We're going to talk about it. Three distinct separate events. One up in the Arctic involving one of their icebreakers. The second involving a Chinese bulk carrier on the eastern shore of Russia off of Sakhalin Island. And the third is a oil tanker that suffered an engine room explosion off the port of Ust-Luga in the Baltic Sea. If you're new to the channel, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you learn about new videos as they come out. The first story involves a Chinese-flagged bulk carrier, the Anying 2. Now, this is a vessel 15 years old, 56,000 tons, that went aground on the eastern side of Sakhalin Island. You can see some very dramatic images of the vessel here. The ship is in ballast, it is not loaded. We're not exactly sure how the vessel came ashore off the coast. We do know that she is fully aground. There is a extreme tide in this area, and ships will experience pretty rough conditions if they do go aground. We're talking about tide ranges here of over 20 feet. The ship is hard aground this time. We believe the vessel has suffered at least 2 hull damages to it, and salvage efforts are underway as we speak. This is a story from Reuters, February 9th. No fuel spillage was recorded. There was no threat to the crew, but the situation required readiness for any scenario, the governor Valery Lemenko said on the Telegram messaging app. The ship was stranded in the shallow water off Sakhalin's Nevelsky district, he added. A high alert regime has been introduced into the district. Lemenko later said that it was a Chinese ship and that marine and diving rescuers could not approach the vessel due to a strong storm. Decisions on unloading the vessel or removing it from the shallows will be made as soon as the weather conditions approve. You see, the ship was able to drop one of its anchors, the starboard anchor. The ship is high and dry. It is going to take a protracted effort to free the vessel. Obviously, the weather conditions in the area were not that great, with snowstorms, high winds, reduced visibility. We don't know why the ship came aground, whether the ship lost power, currents. We'll take a look at its track on marine traffic here. Head over to marine traffic here. Here's the ship outbound from China, heading northeast through the Straits of Tsushima between Korea and Japan. And it was off Sakhalin Island where the vessel began to lose power. Not sure if the ship was not messaging or we just weren't picking it up. But the vessel then comes aground here off of Novlesk in that area. The ship is showing ownership through the Yangpu Ayang Shipping Company. We see that as their beneficial owner and registered owner out in Hainan. The ship is classified through the Chinese Classification Society and has insurance through the London Steamship Owners Mutual Insurance Association. Over the last 12 months, the ship has been operating exclusively in the Pacific region with port calls in China, Russia, Indonesia, Vietnam, Philippines. We believe that the ship is a coal carrier, but at the time of this voyage, she was in ballast and had not yet loaded. The second ship in question is a Antigua Barbuda ship that was departing from Ust-Luga on the Baltic when the ship suffered an engine room explosion. Here's the story over at Maritime Executive. Tanker partially sinks at Russian port of Ust-Luga. Now, I will say that details are sparse on this one. The report goes, Security Services Link Channel Baza reports that the tanker Koala was preparing to depart Ust-Luga in the early hours of Sunday morning when she suffered an engine room explosion. 3 separate blasts were reported as the vessel was preparing to depart and the 24 crew members abandoned ship onto the pier. The engine room flooded and the tanker settled slowly by the stern until it made contact with the bottom. The majority of the ship remains afloat and at present no pollution has been reported or injuries. According to the regional governor of Leningrad, I assume they're talking about St. Petersburg here, the explosions were a man-made incident during engine startup and there was no risk of spill from the incident. Koala is a Turkish-owned, Cypriot-managed Suezmax of 160,000 deadweight ton capacity, 22 years old, past the typical retirement age for crude oil tankers, and has changed her flag state 4 times in the past year. Let's go ahead and take a look at marine traffic. She is 22 years old, 2003 tanker, 164,000 tons, 274 meters in length, flagged in Antigua, Barbuda. If we take a look at ownership here, beneficial owner is the Twin Blue Shipping Company out of Turkey. Her registered owner is Delilah International, also out of Turkey. Her classification society is RENA Services, but we don't show a P&I club for her. This does give some indication that this ship could be a dark fleet vessel. Remember, dark fleet vessels are not engaged in the legal trade. These are ships typically over 15 years old in open registries beyond the norm. Antigua, Barbuda kind of classify for that. Engaged in moving Russian crude or diesel fuel above and beyond the price cap set by the G7 and the EU. If we look at where the ship's been operating the past year, we see it calling in mainly in India, Indonesia, countries like Singapore and Pakistan coming in. So these are kind of ripe here for a ship potentially involved in the dark fleet trade. Pull up her track right now. She is showing to be in Luga Bay off of Ust-Luga. However, we haven't had a hit from her transponder in several days. The explosions on board could be a case of poor maintenance on board the ship. These ships operate slow-speed diesel engines, and if you're not doing proper maintenance of them, you can get anything from a crankcase explosion to explosion buildup within the pistons. No telling what exactly could happen. Could it be sabotage? Of course it could. There's always no end of issues. We did report flooding of the vessel. Now, the ship's buoyancy is provided, even though the ship is fully loaded, by displacing water out of the way. However, the aft compartment, the engine room compartment, if it should start to flood, will create a negative buoyancy. It will start pulling down the vessel. And that could be an issue. Maybe not enough to sink the vessel, but definitely to put it down on the bottom. And now we're seeing salvage efforts taking place. So 2 incidents, 1 on each coast for the Russians. The last one takes us up into the Arctic. This story over at G-Captain involves the Russian nuclear icebreaker, 50 years of victory. You may notice on the port side forward a little bit of a divot there in the side of the vessel that will not buff out. This is from a collision the ship encountered with a ice-laden cargo ship, or an ice-bound cargo ship, that it had to come save. Here's a story. Russian nuclear icebreaker 50 let Pobedy, 50 years of victory, suffered significant damage to its hull in a collision with a cargo ship while operating in the North Sea route. The incident occurred on the night of January 26 in the Kara Sea while maintaining winter shipping lines and escorting a cargo vessel. Based on AIS data, the ship likely collided with a 20,000 dry bulk ton Yamal Cretchet en route to Ob Bay. The condition on Yamal Cretchet is unknown. Nuclear icebreakers also routinely escort LNG carriers and oil tankers along the waterways. According to Russia's operator of nuclear icebreakers, Adam Flott, 50 let Pobedy remains seaworthy and continues operating in Ob Bay. The damage section is not proximate to the vessel's nuclear reactor, and the power plant continues operating. For this part, we have an excellent video here from the bridge of the 50 let Victory coming in. You can see the Yamal kind of encountered and kind of caked there in ice. Notice spotlights are on the vessel. So what the icebreaker is trying to do here, I'm going to hold this image for a second, is you'll see that the ship has kind of gone forward and back here. You can see a little bit of ice broken up here along the front bow. What Russian icebreakers will do is cut lanes through the ice, and smaller vessels will follow those lanes. However, those lanes will close in over time. Icebreakers don't always provide immediate escort. So what 50 years of victory is trying to do here is make an approach close to the Yamal, open up the ice around it, and allow the ship to fall in behind its wake, the wake of the icebreaker, and head its way out. As we let this go, you'll notice the ship's trying to make an approach as close as it can to the cargo ship without encountering the cargo ship. Now, I should note that Russian icebreaker crews are some of the best the Russians have. These are not mediocre crews by any means. However, maneuvering this vessel is a bit difficult. So I'm going to pause it here again for a second because I think it's really important to put a little bit of context here of what's happening. So the Icebreaker wants to come as close as it can to the cargo ship, ideally paralleling it, coming down the vessel's port side as it goes away, turning to the right with the Icebreaker. If the Icebreaker wants to make its turn to the right, it wants to start pushing to the right at this time. You have to be careful about giving it too much rudder. If you give the vessel too much rudder, what's going to happen here is the bow will swing to the right. You're looking ahead here. The bow will swing to the right into this open ice, into this ice area here. But more importantly, the stern will kick out. And because of this broken up ice here, you don't want the stern getting too loose, too free, so that the stern smacks into the bow here of the freighter. You want to try to make as close an approach as you can. But unfortunately, the ice tends to push you toward the ship that's stuck in there. It's almost like a furrow in like fresh snow. It wants to push you here. And what you see is the approach is getting too tight here, too tight. And now the Icebreaker has to make a decision. Do you haul hard right, try to get out of this? Or do you take the glancing blow? And the decision here by the Icebreaker is to go ahead and take the blow. You'll notice that the ice is breaking up astern of the Yamal, but they're going to take a hit here, and then you see the hit where basically that aft mast really comes into contact with the port side forward of the Icebreaker. You can see ice and snow being kicked up at this point. Both vessels come to a stop, and now what you see is the vessels kind of rebounding off each other. The Icebreaker is coming down. You want to be careful about backing down in ice because you don't want to hit floating ice with your propeller. The worst thing you can do on an Icebreaker is have ice come in contact with your propeller and shear off a propeller blade, because then you are unbalanced. And that creates quite a problem here. And so you see the 50 Years of Victory kind of slowly backing off at this moment away from it. This is a very difficult situation to be in. I can't say it enough that I am not faulting the Russian crew here. This is extremely difficult maneuvering to do. Very tough, takes a lot of experience, lots of years of doing this. I've read so much about the Russian icebreaking crew over the years, and I'm always impressed by their abilities to operate in this area. They are really kind of the top, upper crust here of Russian mariners that are out there. I know a lot of people want to make fun of Russian mariners, and we've just had a couple of stories here, but understand this is some of the top sailing experience we see in Russian crews here. Let's take a look at marine traffic and where these vessels were at the time. If we zoom out here a bit, you'll see it is in the Arctic region here along the northern shores of Russia, and it's in one of these kind of classic pinch points where the ice will build up between a pair of Russian islands. This was the time period in which the event took place. You can see some movement in the vessel and then stopping there by the Yamal Crescent. And then the 50 Years of Victory came in here. Again, we don't have a very clear delineation between the two. We do have a moment here where it looks like the ship may come back, and we're going to go ahead and let this play up to here. We think this may be the moment. You can see the escort being done here. The ship is taking it through its motion, a pretty good solid escort of the vessel here, moving along at about 10-12 knots. So definitely a good track of the vessel here. And the vessel does seem to get encumbered by some ice. You'll see the Yamal kind of get stuck at this point. We see the vessels come back in, and this looks like the moment where the actual hit took place, and then the ships were able to continue on with their voyage. Again, not unusual in ice situations for that to happen, but Russia is really working very hard to keep this Arctic ice route open. They had a record voyage last year in terms of tonnage, over 36 million tons of cargo through that area. They want to increase that tenfold within the next 10 years. And so this is an area that they're intending to invest a lot more effort into. Russia is absolutely dependent on ocean trade. And when you have accidents like took place with the Koala, the tanker, off the port of Ust-Luga, when you have the issue with Anyang 2, the bulker grounding off the Sakhalin Islands, and then this collision up in the Arctic, this obviously has an impact in Russia's ability to conduct its trade. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so be alerted about new videos as they come out. Leave a comment, share it across social media, and if you can, support the page. How do you do that? You hit the super thanks button down below, or head on over to Patreon and become a monthly or yearly subscriber. Until our next episode, Sal, signing off.